My belief is that Madeleine McCann died in April or May 2007. I believe Madeleine McCann's corpse was situated in the McCann's holiday apartment for a period of time. I believe that Madeleine McCann's corpse was transported in the McCann's Renault Scenic hire car some weeks after she died. I believe there has been a high-level cover-up about what really happened.
The world knows May 3, 2007, as the night Madeleine McCann vanished from her holiday apartment in Portugal. It's a date seared into our collective memory through countless headlines, documentaries, and search campaigns. But what if that date is a lie? What if Madeleine McCann was already dead by then? What if she actually died on April 29th, 4 days earlier, and everything that followed was an elaborate cover-up? This isn't just another wild internet theory. This is the conclusion reached by investigator Richard D. after years of forensic analysis, timeline reconstruction, and examination of evidence that mainstream media has largely ignored or buried. What if everything you thought you knew about the world's most famous missing child case was wrong? Before we dive deeper, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. I'm fascinated by how far this case has reached and how it continues to resonate with people across the globe. The official story is one we've heard countless times. The McCanns were on vacation in Praia da Luz. They left their 3 children sleeping while they dined with friends at a nearby tapas restaurant. They checked on the children periodically. At around 10 p.m., Kate McCann discovered Madeleine was missing from her bed, triggering the largest missing person search in history. But Hall's investigation suggests something far more disturbing, that Madeleine actually died on Sunday, April 29th. His evidence includes forensic inconsistencies, cadaver dog alerts in the apartment and rental car, and what he calls the last photo, a poolside image whose authenticity has been questioned. If Hall's timeline is correct, it wouldn't just mean a tragic accident was covered up. It would mean an unprecedented level of media manipulation, political protection, and public deception orchestrated at the highest levels. This isn't just about solving a mystery anymore. It's about whether powerful institutions, from media conglomerates to government agencies, conspired to hide the truth from the public. It's about whether justice for a 3-year-old girl was sacrificed to protect reputations and interests we may never fully understand. Tonight, we're going to examine the evidence that Detective Richard D. Hall believes proves Madeleine McCann died days before she was reported missing, and why that revelation matters more than you might think. The accepted narrative. For over 18 years, the world has accepted a specific sequence of events from the evening of May 3, 2007. The McCanns, Kate, Jerry, and their 3 children, were on the 5th night of their vacation at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz, Portugal. At approximately 8:30 p.m., Kate and Jerry left their 3 children, Madeleine, who was nearly 4, and 2-year-old twins Sean and Amelie, asleep in apartment 5A. They joined 7 friends, collectively known as the Tapas 9, for dinner at the resort's tapas restaurant, roughly 180 feet from their apartment. According to statements, the adults established a checking system. Jerry McCann checked on the children at 9:05 p.m. and reported everything was normal. At 9:15 p.m., another dinner guest, Jane Tanner, claimed she saw a man carrying a child near the McCann's apartment. At 9:30 p.m., Matthew Oldfield allegedly entered the apartment but only listened at the children's bedroom door without visually confirming their presence. At 10:00 p.m., Kate McCann went to check and discovered Madeleine missing. The alarm was raised, resort staff were alerted, and a search began. Portuguese police arrived at 11:10 p.m. By midnight, the GNR, National Republican Guard, had established roadblocks. The official investigation had begun. The alternative timeline. Richard D. Hall's investigation presents a radically different scenario. After analyzing witness statements, forensic evidence, and photographic data, Hall concludes that Madeleine McCann likely died on Sunday, April 29th, 4 days before she was reported missing. Hall's timeline suggests that something happened to Madeleine on the 3rd day of the vacation. He points to a near-complete absence of credible, independent witnesses who saw Madeleine after Sunday. The few sightings that exist come almost exclusively from the Tapas group members, whose statements Hall finds problematic. According to this alternative timeline, the days between April 29th and May 3rd involved concealment of Madeleine's death and the orchestration of an abduction scenario. Hall suggests this explains why the McCanns and their friends gave inconsistent statements about the checking routine and events of May 3rd. They were creating and maintaining a false narrative. Key inconsistencies. The discrepancies in witness statements form the foundation of Hall's theory. When Portuguese police interviewed the Tapas 9, they found numerous contradictions. The state of the bedroom door. Kate McCann initially stated she knew something was wrong because the door was more open than she had left it. Later, she claimed it was the curtains blowing that alerted her. Jerry McCann's statements about the door position also changed multiple times. The checking routine. The friends gave conflicting accounts of who checked which apartments and when. Matthew Oldfield's statement about checking the McCann children changed significantly between interviews. The timeline of discovery. The time when Kate discovered Madeleine missing varies by up to 45 minutes across different statements. The window and shutters. Initial reports claimed the shutters had been forced open from the outside. Forensic examination showed no evidence of tampering, and resort staff testified the shutters hadn't been damaged. The last confirmed sightings. Independent witnesses who saw Madeleine after April 29th are remarkably scarce. The children's attendance records at the resort's kids' club show unusual patterns that Hall believes support his timeline. Perhaps most troubling is what Hall calls the last photo, a poolside image of Madeleine with her father and sister, allegedly taken on May 3rd. Forensic analysis of the photo's metadata and weather conditions has led some experts to question whether this photo was actually taken days earlier, possibly on April 29th. Pattern interrupt. What's the weather like where you are right now? Is it the kind of night where you'd leave your children alone in an apartment? It's a question that's haunted this case from the beginning, regardless of which timeline you believe. If Hall's timeline is correct, it doesn't just change when Madeleine disappeared. It transforms our understanding of what happened to her. It suggests that rather than being abducted by a stranger, Madeleine died in the apartment. And what followed was not a search but a cover-up. This alternative timeline would explain why cadaver dogs later alerted to the scent of death in the apartment, and in a car, the McCanns rented 24 days after Madeleine was reported missing. Findings that have never been adequately explained in the context of the official narrative. If you find this information shocking, hit that like button right now. It helps more people discover this investigation and brings attention to a case that deserves a fresh examination after all these years. The most widely circulated image of Madeleine McCann, known as the last photo, shows her sitting by the Ocean Club pool with her father Jerry and younger sister Amelie. According to the McCanns, this photo was taken at 2:29 p.m. on May 3rd, 2007, just hours before Madeleine's reported disappearance. For years, this image served as proof that Madeleine was alive and well that day. However, Richard D. Hall's investigation challenges this timeline. Working with photographic and meteorological experts, Hall conducted a detailed analysis of the image that raised several troubling questions. First, the metadata. While the photo's EXIF data shows it was taken on May 3rd at 13:29, digital forensic experts consulted by Hall note that metadata can be easily modified. More compelling is their analysis of the lighting, shadows, and weather conditions visible in the image. Weather records from Faro Airport, approximately 60 kilometers from Praia da Luz, indicate May 3rd was partly cloudy with temperatures around 63 degrees, 17 degrees. However, the last photo shows bright sunshine, still water in the pool, and the subjects wearing summer clothing consistent with warmer weather. By contrast, April 29th records show clear skies and temperatures of 73 degrees, 23 degrees Celsius, conditions that match the photo perfectly. Hall's team also analyzed shadow angles in the image, which they claim are consistent with the sun's position on April 29th, not May 3rd. Perhaps most telling is the absence of other poolside photos from May 3rd. If the family was enjoying pool time on their last day, why is there only a single image? The McCanns, who documented much of their vacation, have never released additional photos from what would have been Madeleine's final hours. If the last photo was actually taken on April 29th and later presented as evidence of Madeleine's presence on May 3rd, it would represent a deliberate attempt to establish a false timeline, a cornerstone of Hall's theory that Madeleine died days before she was reported missing. In July 2007, 2 months after Madeleine's disappearance, British police brought highly trained forensic dogs to Portugal. These weren't ordinary search dogs. They were specifically trained to detect human remains and blood. Martin Grime, their handler, had worked on over 200 cases with a remarkable accuracy record. The first dog, Eddie, was trained to alert only to the odor of human cadavers, specifically the scent of death that remains after a body has been removed. The second dog, Keeler, was trained to detect human blood, even if it had been cleaned or was invisible to the naked eye. What happened next shocked investigators. Eddie alerted to the scent of human remains in 5 specific locations: behind the sofa, in the living room of apartment 5A, in the McCann's bedroom closet, on the veranda of the apartment, on a T-shirt belonging to Kate McCann, in the trunk of the Renault Scenic, the McCanns rented 24 days after Madeleine's disappearance. Keeler, the blood detection dog, alerted to blood residue in several of the same locations, particularly behind the sofa in the living room. The implications were profound. Cadaver dogs can only detect the scent of death when a body has been in a location for at least 90 minutes to 2 hours. The alerts in the apartment suggested someone had died there, yet according to the official timeline, Madeleine had simply been abducted, not harmed in the apartment. Even more puzzling was the alert in the rental car, which the McCanns didn't rent until 24 days after Madeleine's reported disappearance. If Madeleine had been abducted on May 3rd, how could the scent of death be present in a car the family didn't possess until weeks later? Forensic scientist Dave Barkley, featured in Hall's documentary, called the dog evidence absolutely damning. With over 30 years of experience, Barkley stated, "The chance of the dogs being wrong is so remote that you can effectively discount it." Portuguese forensic experts collected samples from areas where the dogs alerted. These were sent to the Forensic Science Service, FSS, in Birmingham, England, for DNA analysis. The results were inconclusive, showing partial matches to Madeleine's DNA profile, but not complete matches. The FSS report stated that 15 out of 19 markers matched Madeleine's DNA in samples from the car trunk, but cautioned this could represent a mixture of DNA from multiple family members. John Lowe of the FSS wrote that the results were too complex for meaningful interpretation. Critics, including Hall, question why more sophisticated DNA analysis techniques weren't employed, particularly low copy number (LCN) DNA testing, which can analyze minute samples. Other forensic experts have noted that the cleaning of apartment 5A before forensic teams arrived compromised potential evidence. Portuguese police reported that the apartment had a strong smell of cleaning products when they arrived, and Kate McCann confirmed she had washed Madeleine's stuffed toy, Cuddle Cat, before forensic examination, actions that apartment 5A was a ground-floor 2-bedroom unit at the Ocean Club Resort. Entering from the front, you'd walk into a small hallway leading to a combined living and dining area with a kitchenette. A patio door in this room opened onto a veranda overlooking the street and pool area. This door, according to the McCanns, was left unlocked on the night of May 3rd. To the left of the living area was the main bedroom where Kate and Jerry slept. To the right was the children's bedroom with 3 beds, a single bed under the window where Madeleine slept, and 2 travel cots for the twins. Between these bedrooms was a bathroom. The cadaver dog alerts were concentrated in specific areas: behind the sofa in the living room, which was positioned against the wall adjacent to the children's bedroom, in the main bedroom closet, and on the veranda. These locations form a potential path from the children's bedroom to the outside, a path that could indicate movement of a body. The blood dog alerts were more specific, focusing primarily on the area behind the sofa and on the tile floor in the living room. Forensic teams took samples from these areas, but the apartment had been thoroughly cleaned and rented to new tenants before the dogs arrived in July. What's particularly striking about the evidence locations is their alignment with Hall's theory. If Madeleine died in the apartment on April 29th, The cadaver dog alerts could indicate temporary storage locations before her body was moved. The alert in the rental car trunk could suggest final transportation of remains weeks later, after media attention made immediate disposal too risky. This investigation took hundreds of hours to research, analyzing forensic reports, weather data, witness statements, and expert testimonies. If you appreciate this deep dive into evidence that mainstream coverage often glosses over, consider subscribing to support more true crime investigations like this one. Your support helps us continue uncovering the facts in cases where the truth has been buried. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann triggered what many consider the most intense media coverage of a missing person case in history. Within days, her face appeared on front pages worldwide, and news crews descended on Praia da Luz, transforming the quiet resort town into a media circus. What's remarkable, according to Richard D. Hall, isn't just the scale of coverage, but its nature. From the outset, mainstream media outlets overwhelmingly presented the case through a single lens. Madeleine had been abducted by a stranger while her parents dined nearby. Alternative scenarios, including the possibility of death in the apartment, were largely dismissed or labeled as cruel conspiracy theories. This one-dimensional coverage persisted, despite significant developments that should have prompted more critical reporting. When Portuguese police named the McCanns as arguidos, formal suspects, in September 2007, British tabloids that had previously championed the couple briefly shifted tone. However, this critical coverage quickly gave way to a narrative portraying Portuguese authorities as incompetent and the McCanns as victims of a botched. Hall points to several troubling aspects of the media response. First, the unprecedented access granted to the McCanns. While parents of missing children typically receive media attention, the McCanns appeared on major news programs, met with the Pope, and were given platforms normally reserved for public figures. Their campaign received support from celebrities, business leaders, and politicians, resources far beyond those available to typical families of missing children. Second, the rapid formation of a professional PR operation. The McCanns were advised by multiple PR consultants, including former BBC journalist Clarence Mitchell, who left his position at the government's Central Office of Information to work for the couple full-time. Mitchell had previously served as director of the Media Monitoring Unit, which controlled government news management, an unusual background for someone representing private citizens. Third, the legal pressure applied to media outlets. The McCanns successfully sued several British newspapers for libel, receiving substantial damages. While some reporting was undoubtedly sensationalistic, Hall argues these legal actions had a chilling effect on legitimate investigative journalism, discouraging outlets from pursuing lines of inquiry that might implicate the parents. Perhaps most significantly, Hall notes how quickly the media narrative solidified around the abduction theory, despite a lack of physical evidence supporting it. No credible suspect was identified, no ransom demanded, and no forensic evidence of an intruder was found, yet the abduction narrative dominated headlines from day one. The political response to Madeleine's disappearance was extraordinary by any standard. Within days, diplomatic channels between Britain and Portugal were activated at the highest levels. Then Prime Minister Gordon Brown personally intervened, speaking directly with Portuguese authorities and dispatching British police specialists to assist. The UK's ambassador to Portugal, John Buck, arrived in Praia da Luz within 24 hours of Madeleine's reported disappearance, an unusual step for a missing person case. Foreign Secretary Margaret Beckett assigned a special diplomat to provide support to the family. These actions, while perhaps compassionate, represent a level of government involvement rarely seen in missing person cases. Hall's investigation raises uncomfortable questions about this political response. Why did Madeleine's case warrant such high-level intervention when other missing children cases typically receive only standard consular assistance? What justified the exceptional resources devoted to this particular case? More troubling are the connections Hall identifies between key figures in the case and British political establishments. Clarence Mitchell's government background has already been mentioned. Additionally, the McCann's spokesman Angus McBride was a partner at Kingsley Napley, a law firm with connections to high-profile political cases. The McCanns also received advice from Lord Tim Bell, former advisor to Margaret Thatcher. Hall suggests these connections may explain why British authorities appeared reluctant to pursue certain investigative avenues. When Portuguese police requested financial records, phone data, and medical information from the McCanns and their friends, British agencies were slow to cooperate or provided incomplete information. Perhaps most significantly, Hall points to the creation of Operation Grange in 2011, a Scotland Yard review of the case that later became a full investigation. Launched after personal intervention from Prime Minister David Cameron, Operation Grange has cost British taxpayers over $12 million. Yet, from its inception, Grange's remit specifically excluded investigating the McCanns, focusing solely on the abduction theory, despite the lack of evidence supporting it. This political protection, Hall argues, prevented a thorough, unbiased investigation and may have obstructed justice for Madeleine. Richard D. Hall comes to the Madeleine McCann case not as a traditional journalist, but as an independent investigator with a background in engineering and documentary filmmaking. His approach combines forensic analysis, witness interviews, and document examination, methods he developed investigating other controversial cases. Hall's investigation began in 2013, 6 years after Madeleine's disappearance. Frustrated by what he perceived as superficial mainstream coverage, he traveled to Praia da Luz to conduct his own research. He walked the routes described by witnesses, measured distances between key locations, and interviewed local residents whose perspectives had been largely ignored by major media outlets. His findings, compiled in the documentary series Buried by Mainstream Media, The True Story of Madeleine McCann, challenge virtually every aspect of the official narrative. Through meticulous timeline analysis, Hall identified numerous inconsistencies in witness statements. By examining weather records and shadow analysis, he questioned the authenticity of the last photo, and, by consulting with forensic experts, he highlighted the significance of the cadaver dog evidence. What distinguishes Hall's investigation is its comprehensiveness. Rather than focusing on isolated aspects of the case, he constructed an alternative narrative that accounts for all the evidence, including elements that the abduction theory struggles to explain, such as the lack of credible sightings of Madeleine after April 29th and the cadaver scent in the rental car. Critics dismiss Hall as a conspiracy theorist, pointing to his interest in other controversial topics. Supporters counter that his engineering background gives him analytical skills well suited to forensic investigation, and that his independence from mainstream media allows him to pursue unpopular but evidence-based conclusions. What time is it where you're watching? Late-night true crime viewers often notice details others miss. There's something about the quiet hours that helps us see patterns and connections that might otherwise remain hidden. One of the most perplexing aspects of the Madeleine McCann case is the near-complete absence of surveillance footage from a popular tourist destination during peak season. Praia da Luz in 2007 was a developed resort town with numerous hotels, restaurants, shops, and banks, establishments that typically maintain security cameras. Yet investigators were unable to obtain comprehensive CCTV evidence that might have captured Madeleine's alleged abductor or tracked the movements of key individuals. This surveillance gap becomes even more striking when we consider the specific locations involved. The Ocean Club resort itself had minimal security cameras, with none covering the area around apartment 5A. The nearby streets which any abductor would have needed to use were similarly undocumented. Even the main road leading out of Praia da Luz, the most likely escape route, yielded no useful footage. Richard D. Hall's investigation highlights several troubling aspects of this surveillance vacuum. First, the timing of requests for footage. Portuguese police didn't begin collecting CCTV from local businesses until May 5th, 2 days after Madeleine was reported missing. By then, many systems had already overwritten their recordings from May 3rd and the crucial days before. Second, the limited scope of collection. Investigators focused primarily on gathering footage from May 3rd, operating under the assumption that this was when the abduction occurred. If Hall's theory is correct and Madeleine died on April 29th, The most relevant surveillance evidence would have been from days earlier, footage that was never systematically collected. Third, the handling of what little footage was obtained. Several businesses did provide recordings, including a nearby bank and supermarket. However, these videos were reportedly of poor quality, and the chain of custody remains unclear. Hall questions whether these recordings were thoroughly analyzed, using enhancement techniques that might have revealed crucial details. Perhaps most significantly, Hall points to the absence of border surveillance. Portugal shares a land border with Spain, and both countries are part of the Schengen area, allowing relatively easy cross-border travel. Yet there appears to have been minimal effort to secure footage from border crossings or major highways leading to Spain, routes that would have been logical for someone attempting to remove a child from the country. This comprehensive lack of surveillance evidence creates a troubling void in the investigation. In an era of increasing digital monitoring, how could a high-profile abduction occur in a tourist area without leaving any video trace? Hall suggests this absence is more consistent with his theory that there was no abduction on May 3rd to capture on camera because Madeleine had already died days earlier. The investigation into Madeleine's disappearance relied heavily on witness statements in the absence of physical evidence or surveillance footage. Yet these testimonies, when examined closely, reveal patterns of inconsistency and modification that undermine their reliability. The statements from the Tapas 9, the McCanns and their 7 friends, show particularly troubling contradictions. Initial interviews conducted by Portuguese police revealed discrepancies in their accounts of the checking routine, the state of the apartment, and the timeline of events on May 3rd. When re-interviewed months later by British police, several members of the group altered key details of their statements. Jane Tanner's testimony exemplifies these issues. Initially, she claimed to have seen a man carrying a child near the McCann's apartment around 9:15 p.m. on May 3rd. Her description of this figure changed multiple times, from wearing casual clothes to more formal attire, from having short hair to long hair. Years later, during Operation Grange, this sighting was officially dismissed when a British tourist came forward to say he had been carrying his own child at that time and location. Similarly problematic are the statements from staff and guests at the Ocean Club. Several employees initially reported that they hadn't seen Madeleine during the days leading up to May 3rd. Some later modified these statements after media coverage intensified. Resort records show Madeleine was checked into the kids' club on May 3rd, but staff members gave conflicting accounts about whether they actually saw her that day. Hall's investigation also highlights the testimony of Martin Smith, an Irish tourist who reported seeing a man carrying a child toward the beach around 10:00 p.m. on May 3rd. Smith initially didn't connect this sighting to the McCann case. Months later, after seeing footage of Jerry McCann carrying one of his twins, Smith stated he was 60–80% certain the man he saw was Jerry McCann himself, a claim that would directly contradict the official timeline. If we accept Hall's theory that Madeleine died on April 29th, what might the actual timeline look like? Sunday, April 29th. Something happens to Madeleine in apartment 5A, resulting in her death. This could have been an accident, perhaps involving medication, as cadaver dogs later detected death scent in the apartment. The McCanns, and possibly some friends, become aware of the situation. April 29th, May 3rd. The group conceals Madeleine's death while determining how to handle the situation. Her body is temporarily hidden, possibly in locations where cadaver dogs later alerted. During this period, the last photo by the pool, actually taken on April 29th, is selected to establish Madeleine's presence later in the week. May 3rd. The group implements their plan, staging an abduction scenario. Kate McCann raises the alarm at around 10:00 p.m., triggering a search and police response. The ensuing chaos and media attention make it impossible to move Madeleine's remains immediately. Late May, early June, with media attention still intense but search efforts focusing elsewhere, the McCanns rent a car on May 27th. According to Hall's theory, this vehicle is used to transport Madeleine's remains to a more secure location, explaining why cadaver dogs later alerted to the car's trunk. This reconstructed timeline would explain many otherwise puzzling elements. the lack of credible sightings of Madeleine after April 29th, the cadaver scent in locations including a car rented weeks later, and the inconsistent statements from the Tapas group as they attempted to maintain a fabricated narrative. Despite years of investigation costing millions of pounds, crucial questions remain unanswered. Why were no credible independent witnesses able to confirm seeing Madeleine alive between April 30th and May 3rd? How could cadaver scent be present in a car rented 24 days after Madeleine's reported abduction? Why did the McCanns refuse to participate in a reconstruction of the events of May 3rd when requested by Portuguese authorities? What explains the complete absence of useful surveillance footage from a developed tourist area? If Madeleine was abducted by a predator, why has no similar abduction occurred in the region before or since? These questions, Hall argues, find more logical answers in his April 29th timeline than in the official abduction narrative. Richard D. Hall's theory that Madeleine McCann died on April 29, 2007, 4 days before she was reported missing, has both compelling strengths and significant weaknesses that deserve careful examination. The theory's greatest strength lies in its explanatory power. It provides coherent answers to questions that the official abduction narrative struggles to address. The cadaver dog alerts in the apartment and rental car, the lack of credible sightings after April 29th, the absence of forensic evidence supporting an intruder, and the inconsistencies in witness statements. By proposing an earlier death, Hall creates a framework that accommodates these otherwise puzzling elements. The forensic evidence, particularly the cadaver dog alerts, offers substantial support. These highly trained dogs indicated the presence of human remains in multiple locations associated with the McCanns, including a car they didn't rent until weeks after Madeleine's reported disappearance. While not conclusive on their own, these alerts become difficult to explain away when combined with other evidence Hall cites. The timeline analysis also strengthens Hall's case. His meticulous examination of witness statements reveals numerous contradictions that suggest coordination rather than independent recollection. The weather-based analysis of the last photo raises legitimate questions about when it was actually taken, and the documented lack of independent sightings of Madeleine after April 29th creates a troubling void in the official narrative. However, Hall's theory also has significant weaknesses. Most notably, it lacks definitive physical evidence of Madeleine's death on April 29th. The DNA evidence from areas where cadaver dogs alerted was inconclusive, showing partial matches to Madeleine's profile, but not complete ones. Without a body or conclusive forensic proof, the theory remains circumstantial. The theory also requires a conspiracy of considerable scope. For Hall's timeline to be accurate, not only the McCanns, but several of their friends would need to have participated in concealing a death and staging an abduction. Such a conspiracy would be difficult to maintain under intense scrutiny, especially given the international media attention the case received. Additionally, Hall's theory struggles to explain certain behavioral aspects. The McCanns' persistent campaign to find Madeleine, continuing for years and at considerable personal cost, seems difficult to reconcile with knowledge of her death. Their willingness to invite police involvement and media attention would represent an extraordinary risk if they were indeed covering up a death. Finally, Hall's background in investigating controversial topics and conspiracy theories has led critics to question his objectivity. While his engineering approach brings valuable analytical skills to the case, his interest in other contentious subjects has allowed some to dismiss his Madeleine McCann work without engaging with its substance. Several alternative theories have emerged to explain the evidence in the McCann case, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. The official abduction theory, maintained by Operation Grange and supported by the McCanns, holds that an opportunistic predator took Madeleine while her parents dined nearby. This theory's primary strength is its simplicity. It doesn't require complex conspiracy or cover-up scenarios. Its main weakness is the lack of supporting physical evidence. No forensic proof of an intruder was found, no similar abductions occurred in the area, and no credible suspect has been identified despite massive publicity. A variation of the abduction theory suggests Madeleine was targeted by a trafficking ring. This would explain the apparent planning involved, as opposed to an opportunistic crime, and the lack of a body. However, it fails to address the cadaver dog evidence or explain why traffickers would target a relatively high-profile British child when more vulnerable victims were available. Another perspective, advanced by former Portuguese detective Gonçalo Amaral, suggests Madeleine died accidentally in the apartment on May 3rd, perhaps from a fall while left alone, and her parents concealed the death to avoid negligence charges. This theory accounts for the forensic evidence, but struggles with the timeline issues Hall identifies, particularly the lack of sightings between April 29th and May 3rd. Some analysts have proposed that Madeleine wandered out of the apartment and met with an accident, with her body later discovered by her parents, who then concealed it, fearing blame. This would explain both the death scent in the apartment and the parents' subsequent actions, but doesn't address the cadaver dog alerts in locations like the car rental. A more nuanced perspective suggests that Hall's timeline may be partially correct. Madeleine might have died earlier than reported, but that the circumstances were different than he proposes. Perhaps she fell ill days before May 3rd, was given medication that led to her death, and the parents delayed reporting while deciding how to proceed. This would explain the timeline discrepancies without requiring an elaborate conspiracy. Discussing alternative theories in the McCann case raises profound ethical questions about the boundaries of public discourse, the rights of the accused, and the pursuit of truth in high-profile cases. The most immediate ethical concern involves the impact on the McCann family. If the parents are indeed victims who lost their daughter to abduction, theories implicating them compound their tragedy with false accusation. The psychological harm of such allegations on grieving parents and on Madeleine's siblings as they grow up cannot be overstated. Conversely, if there is legitimate evidence suggesting the official narrative is false, there are ethical questions about suppressing that evidence. Does protecting the family's reputation outweigh the public's right to know what happened to Madeleine? Does it supersede the principle that justice should be pursued regardless of who stands accused? The media's role raises additional ethical issues. Mainstream outlets have largely avoided detailed discussion of alternative theories, often dismissing them as conspiracy thinking or cruel speculation. While this approach protects the McCanns from potentially unfounded accusations, it may also prevent legitimate questioning of inconsistencies in the official narrative. Law enforcement faces its own ethical dilemmas. Operation Granger's decision to focus exclusively on the abduction theory, explicitly excluding investigation of the parents, raises questions about investigative integrity. Is it ethical to narrow an investigation's scope based on political considerations rather than following evidence wherever it leads? For content creators like ourselves, the ethical challenges are particularly acute. How do we balance responsible reporting with thorough investigation? How do we present alternative theories without sensationalizing tragedy or making unfounded accusations? These questions have no easy answers, but they demand careful consideration. Perhaps the most profound ethical question is whether the pursuit of truth justifies the potential harm of public speculation. In cases like Madeleine's, where definitive answers may never emerge, the line between legitimate investigation and harmful conjecture becomes increasingly blurred. Have you ever followed a case where your opinion completely changed after learning new evidence? Share your experience in the comments. It's fascinating how additional information can transform our understanding of events we thought we understood, sometimes revealing that our initial certainty was built on incomplete foundations. Beyond the specific details of Madeleine's case, Hall's investigation raises disturbing questions about how high-profile cases are handled by authorities and media. If powerful interests can shape narratives and direct investigations away from certain avenues, what does this mean for justice more broadly? The extraordinary resources devoted to this single case, over 12 million from British taxpayers alone, contrast sharply with the limited attention given to thousands of other missing children. This disparity suggests factors beyond justice may influence which cases receive thorough investigation and which fade from public consciousness. Similarly, the media's role in establishing and maintaining narratives deserves scrutiny. the McCann case represents perhaps the first missing person investigation conducted in the full glare of 24-hour news coverage and social media speculation. The resulting pressure on investigators, witnesses, and the family itself created an environment where truth-seeking became increasingly difficult. Whether or not one accepts Hall's specific timeline, his work highlights the importance of questioning official narratives, especially when they contain inconsistencies or fail to account for significant evidence. In a world of managed information and strategic communication, independent investigation becomes not just valuable but necessary. 18 years after Madeleine McCann's disappearance, her case remains officially unsolved. Operation Grange, the Metropolitan Police investigation launched in 2011, continues to operate with reduced resources after costing British taxpayers over $12 million. Portuguese authorities reopened their investigation in 2013, running it parallel to, but separate from the British inquiry. In June 2020, German prosecutors announced they were investigating Christian Bruckner, a convicted sex offender who was in the Algarve when Madeleine vanished. They stated they believe Madeleine is dead, but have not disclosed the evidence supporting this conclusion. Bruckner, currently imprisoned in Germany for unrelated offences, denies any involvement in Madeleine's disappearance. Despite these developments, no charges have been filed against Bruckner or anyone else in connection with Madeleine's case. The McCanns continue to maintain that their daughter was abducted and may still be alive, while Portuguese, British, and German authorities pursue different investigative approaches with varying theories. Richard D. Hall's alternative timeline, suggesting Madeleine died on April 29th rather than being abducted on May 3rd, remains outside official investigation parameters. Operation Grange's remit specifically excludes investigating scenarios other than abduction, a limitation that critics argue has prevented a comprehensive examination of all possibilities. Regardless of which theory one finds most compelling, fundamental questions remain unanswered in the McCann case. If Madeleine was abducted by a predator on May 3rd, why has no physical evidence of an intruder ever been found? Why did cadaver dogs alert to the scent of death in locations associated with the McCanns, including a car rented weeks after her disappearance? And why have no similar abductions occurred in the region before or since? If Madeleine died on April 29th, as Hall suggests, what caused her death? Where are her remains? And how could such an elaborate cover-up be maintained under intense international scrutiny? If Christian Bruckner was involved, what evidence connects him directly to Madeleine beyond his presence in the area? Why did German prosecutors publicly name him without filing charges? And how does his involvement explain the forensic evidence in the apartment and rental car? Perhaps most troubling is the question of whether we will ever know the truth. As memories fade, evidence deteriorates and witnesses pass away, the window for resolving this case narrows. The extraordinary resources already devoted to the investigation have failed to provide definitive answers, raising the possibility that Madeleine's fate may remain unknown. What we do know with certainty is that a 3-year-old girl vanished, leaving behind grieving parents, confused siblings, and a public haunted by her image. Whatever happened to Madeleine McCann, she deserved better than to become the center of one of the most controversial missing person cases in history. The Madeleine McCann case reveals as much about our society as it does about the specific events in Praia da Luz. It shows how wealth, connections, and media savvy can transform a personal tragedy into an international cause. It demonstrates how quickly narratives solidify, making alternative perspectives difficult to consider regardless of supporting evidence. And it highlights the challenges of pursuing truth when powerful interests have stakes in particular outcomes.